Hey, welcome to Restoration. I'm Matt. So glad you could join us on this Shabbat or whatever day you're watching this message. We're glad you're hanging with us. Today we begin the fifth and final book of the Torah, the scroll of Deuteronomy, as we've been spending a year on the Jewish calendar going through the Torah, the five books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's foundational to understanding the God of Israel and his heart to bring all of creation back to himself. So today's message as we begin the book of Deuteronomy is called Listen and Love. The heart of the book of Deuteronomy is this. To love God is to listen, and to listen is to obey. To obey is to love God and love people. That's what it means to live in covenant relationship. So we start in Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 3. It says, Now Moses spoke to Bnei Israel, the sons of Israel, according to all Adonai had commanded him for them in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month. So Deuteronomy opens on the first day of Shavat. That for us is like between January and February. It's 40 years after the Exodus. And Israel's camped east of the Jordan at Bethany beyond the Jordan, like we talked about in the last message in Numbers. And it's just over 2 months. In just over 2 months, Moses will die. Israel will cross into the Promised Land right before Passover, and they'll celebrate their first Passover in the land of Canaan on the 14th of Nisan. So Deuteronomy records Moses' final sermons, likely delivered over a 5-week span. He's preaching to the new generation that's preparing to inherit the promised land of our fathers. So from Deuteronomy chapter 1 to Joshua chapter 5, it covers about 2.5 months. The Hebrew name of the book Deuteronomy is called Devarim because it means these are the words, right from Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 1. Devarim, these are the words that Moses spoke to Israel across the Jordan in the wilderness. Now, Deuteronomy in English comes from the Greek, from the Septuagint, which is a Jewish translation from Hebrew to Greek about 200 years before Yeshua, and it means second law or repeat of the Torah. Because Moses, in his last words to Israel before they cross into the Promised Land, reiterates the commandments that God spoke to him on Mount Sinai. But now there are some adjustments. Because the people will no longer be nomads wandering in the wilderness, but permanent residents in the land of promise. So the commandments are now more specific to living in the promised land. And the way that Deuteronomy breaks up is sort of in 3 natural sections. Moses has some opening speeches from Deuteronomy chapter 1 to Deuteronomy chapter 11. And then there's a section of instructions or Torah, commandments, laws from Deuteronomy 12 to Deuteronomy 26. And then Moses' final speech and death happened from Deuteronomy 27 to 34. So Devarim, Deuteronomy, is the last of the 5 scrolls of the Torah, and it concludes the narrative of Moses. Starts with the creation of the world, through the creation of God's people, who then are going to bless the nations and bring the God of Israel to the world. So God promised that he would bring us to the land, that he promised to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Deuteronomy ends on the edge of the wilderness, standing by a river that will soon part, just like the parting of the Sea of Reeds 40 years earlier. Now, Deuteronomy refers to itself as Sefer HaTorah HaZot, which is this teaching, or this book of teaching, or this book of Torah. In later rabbinic literature, it's called Mishneh Torah, which is the repetition of Torah. Deuteronomy is Moses' retelling. It's of the giving of the Torah to a new generation who have to be reminded of the sins of their fathers so they don't repeat them, and need instruction, or the word Torah, for how to live well in the land that God has given them. So as we've said throughout the entire Torah since Exodus, if a biblical religion revolves around 2 themes, creation and Exodus, then Deuteronomy intentionally mirrors Genesis in many ways through the story. And it also reflects the Exodus and the journey to get to this moment of crossing into the Promised Land. By design, the Promised Land is like the Garden of Eden. It's a place of rest. It's a place of provision. And it's a place where Israel can walk with God. Jerusalem is like the Garden of Eden. And the larger land of Israel is the region around the garden called Eden. And outside of Israel, east of the Jordan, is the wilderness. The imagery is intentional. And it forces us, if we pay attention to the narrative and to the text, to meditate on the goodness of God as one who fulfills his promises. Now, people, when it comes to Deuteronomy specifically, and the Torah as a whole, people often set up this incorrect dynamic of faith and practice of religion versus relationship. Some people talk about it in terms of this religion versus relationship is like saying things like, God doesn't want religion. What he wants is relationship. I don't know why I became Southern. Well, I do know why. It's an important impulse, a desire for a real personal connection with God, not just hollow rituals or empty rule following. But in the Hebrew Bible and in Jewish thought, religion and relationship are not opposites. In fact, they're deeply connected. In Jewish understanding, religion is how we live and how we walk out our relationship with God. So there's the observing of mitzvot, observing of commandments. There's celebrating Shabbat. There's studying the Torah and keeping the festivals. They're not just checked boxes. They're of things that we complete. They're covenant expressions of love, loyalty, and belonging. In Judaism, obedience isn't dry legalism. It's a way of saying, God, I trust you, and I love you, and I want to walk in your ways. So as a Messianic congregation in Seattle, we believe that faithfulness is not just how you feel, it's how you walk. And that walk, when grounded in love, may look religious to some people on the outside, except it's really just what covenant love looks like in our everyday life. Yeshua did not reject religion. He certainly critiques hypocrisy in the first century, but he challenges outward obedience he challenges outward obedience without inward love. He wants our inside to match our outside. That comes from Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy is calling for wholehearted love that leads to a whole life of faithfulness. It's the heart of Deuteronomy, and really the whole Torah is found in what's called the Shema. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words, which I'm commanding you today, are to be on your heart. You're to teach them diligently to your children and speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up. You will bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. So this word Shema repeats in Deuteronomy many times, especially in the first 11 chapters of Devarim, in Moses' first set of sermons. There's actually two words that are themes through the whole scroll, and they're found in the cornerstone prayer, the Shema. The first is to hear, Shema. The second is to love, which is Ahav. When people quote the Torah, they often quote Deuteronomy. The Shema and the Ve'ahavta are some of the most important prayers in the Torah for the structure of Jewish prayer and worship. They're the backbone of Jewish thought and Jewish practice. Of the traditional number of commandments in Jewish thought, which is 613, which is really far after Yeshua, but at least 200 of them come from Deuteronomy. And there's a lot of laws, but those laws are not designed as a legal code. They're rather a practical exploration of how to honor God who brought us to this good and safe land. And so the word Shema means more than hear or listen. And as you know, through our whole Torah series in the last year, it often takes several English words to define one Hebrew word. The word Shema really means listen and obey, or have attentive hearing that leads to obedience. In biblical Hebrew, there's not actually a separate word for obey. It's implied in the word Shema, to listen and obey. In Jewish tradition, the second paragraph of what we call the Shema in the daily prayers comes from Deuteronomy 11, in verse 13, which actually says the word Shema twice. It's a double Shema. If you listen obediently to my commandments. But in Hebrew, it's ve'aha'im shemoa tishmeu el mitzvotai. It's a double Shema. It's listen, you will listen. Or if you really listen. It's the word Shema twice. And it happens all through the scriptures. Well, we know this as parents because our children can hear the words we're saying with our mouths. And if they don't do what we say, did they really listen? Like, did you actually hear me? I feel it rising up within me. Yeah, I heard you. Well, then why haven't you done what I said? That's why this verse is translated many ways, like if you earnestly obey, or if you diligently listen, or if you fully heed. To Shema is to hear the words and do what the words say. It doesn't mean just hearing the words. It doesn't mean just listening. It means paying attention, letting the words sink in, and responding then with action. To hear implies obedience, and obedience is part of relationship and religion. We observe the words of the Torah because we love God. He loved us first, and obeying him is a way to love him back. It's not about just following rules. It's about being in a loving relationship with the God who formed us in our mother's womb. That brings us to the second word, important word in this first section of Deuteronomy, chapters 1 through 11, and that's the word ahav, which is love. To Shema, to hear and obey, is to love the Lord with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and all of your strength. The action is ahavah. It's to love. According to the Bible Project's video on love, they say there's a parental ahavah, there's a brotherly ahavah, there's love for the king of Israel that's expressed by the people, and it can describe loyalty between political allies. So ahavah is used often, it's affection, but it's used in many different ways. And God shows ahavah, he shows affection as part of his character. He has affection for his people. It can be used as love in marriage and for children, which is why God is referred to as a father and a mother. And we're the bride, Israel is the bride of God, and we are his children. Like all of that imagery, it's not just a feeling. It's also an action. It's something God does, and then something we do in return. So we love by showing action of ahavah and doing what God has asked us to do because he loves us. John picks up this same meaning of ahavah, of love, in the New Testament, which is a very Jewish book. 1 John chapter 4. There's no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and the one who fears has not been made perfect in love. We don't fear God's reprisal for not keeping commandments. We love God by being obedient to his words, his devarim. Fear is about punishment, and when you love in relationship, there's no fear, there's love, and love drives out fear. So to love is to Shema. It's to listen and obey. And John completes his thought. He says, we love because he first loved us. To listen, to obey, and to love is at the heart of keeping the Torah. It's not about judgment. It's not about condemnation or shame for not doing what's right or what you're supposed to do. When we treat ourselves or others that way, we're not acting in love. Many people consider themselves keepers of the Torah or somewhat Torah observant. You are not walking correctly in the Torah if it's not full of love. Love doesn't mean everything is warm and squishy. Love also corrects sin. But correction has to come from a place of love and leading people back to Shema, which is listening and obeying. In Deuteronomy, as Moses is preaching these amazing sermons, like the first sermons ever preached, of Shema and love, he comes back to all the things God said to him at Mount Sinai. And he's telling a new generation the importance of loving God and one another, about listening and obeying and loving, and he reminds them of the 10 words. Some people call them the 10 commandments, and the stone tablets on the mountain. Deuteronomy 4, verse 11, it says, you came near and stood at the bottom of the mountain Well, the mountain was blazing with fire up to the heart of the heavens, darkness, cloud, and fog. And Adonai spoke to you from the midst of the fire. The sound of the words you heard, but a form you did not see, only a voice. It's interesting how many times Moses says you, like you were there. He says the Lord spoke to you. You heard his voice. You stood at the mountain, but most of the people he's talking to weren't even born yet when those things happen. So why does he keep saying you? It's because covenant is not just historical, it's generational. It's not just what happened to them in the past, it's also what's true for us today. If you're a part of the people of God, then you were there. If you are Jewish, you were there because it's your people's story. If you're a Gentile who follows Yeshua, you were there because you've been grafted into the family of God. It all comes down to listen and love. This is your covenant. These are God's words for you. This is your God. You are not a spectator to the Torah. You're a participant. You're not an observer of God's faithfulness. You are an inheritor. So the question isn't, what did they hear? The question is, what will I do with what I've heard? Devarim, the words. To Shema is to listen and obey. To Ahav is to love with all of your being. And that starts with taking ownership of the story. You were there. Moses reminds the people, and he reminds you and me that what the Lord said through Moses at the bottom of Mount Sinai. He says in Deuteronomy 4, verse 13, he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to do, the 10 words, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. Now, we talked about this, the 2 tablets of stone, when we were preaching through Exodus, the first time we see it, and it's important to go over it again, just like Moses is doing with the people in Deuteronomy. This is how we think, generally, of the 10 Commandments. We think of Charlton Heston holding the stone. The curve in the stone, by the way, didn't happen in art until like the 1100s. But this is not accurate. There are 2 tablets, and they fit in his hands. They're written by God on both sides of the tablet. So for me, it looks more like this. He's holding, yes, those are iPads, because Moses is the first person to download from the cloud onto his tablet. But the covenant Moses receives is not just a list of rules. It's a relational framework. Many scholars say that the 2 tablets were not 5 commandments on one side and 5 commandments on the other. But actually, there are 10 commandments on the front and the back of the stone, 2 copies. Because this is how treaties worked in the ancient Near East. There's 2 copies, one for each side of the treaty. But what's different in the Torah is God commands Moses to keep both copies in the ark in God's presence, because his faithfulness only depends on him. So if the heart of Deuteronomy is to listen and love, then the 10 words are its foundation. They begin the same way in Deuteronomy as they do in Exodus. And if you don't know, there's a traditional Jewish order and a Christian order of the 10 words. And in Judaism, the opening statement is regarded as the first commandment, or the first word. And it starts like this: I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. Now, technically, it's not a commandment, but it's a recognition of who saves. We did not bring ourselves out of Egypt. The Lord is the one who saved us from Egypt. There is a literary division in the first 5 commandments, and each of the first 5 commandments have the phrase, the Lord your God. The second group of 5 don't have that phrase. And it's because the first 5 are unique to the Torah and Israelite literature within the ancient Near East. They are not represented anywhere except in the Torah. They're dependent on the Lord. The second 5 are found in all the other ancient Near East literature we have from that time. The key difference is that for Israel, they're directives from God, not just the fruit of human wisdom. The 10 words begin in Hebrew at the top right, because it goes from right to left on the tablet. I am the Lord your God. And everything that follows is from him and about him, and we'll have no other gods above him. But if you think about how the 10 words end, the bottom right of the back side of the tablet is Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 18. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, nor desire your neighbor's house, his field, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So each of the 2 tablets, which are copies of each other, begin with, I am the Lord your God, and end with, on the back side, your neighbor. The 10 words are a summary version of the rest of the Torah, which is the instructions for Israel. This is what makes us a wholly, completely other nation. We are God's segulah. We are his special treasure, back to Exodus, his representatives to the goyim, to the nations. The first 5 commandments are unique to Israel in the ancient Near East. There's nothing like the first 5. The second 5 are found throughout the ancient Near East, but here they're divine directives for the people, because it all comes down to listen and love. Now, many Jewish writings argue that the first 5 commandments are for the Jewish people, as part of our unique relationship with the God of Israel. The second 5 are universal commandments, well understood throughout the ancient Near East as universal to all people. Do not murder, do not commit adultery. The first 5 are specific obligations of Jewish people as a set-apart people for the Lord, and the second 5 apply universally to all people. Now, that doesn't mean that for those of you that are Gentiles, that you should ignore the first 5, because there's wisdom and understanding under every commandment that applies to everyone. But the division of people is from God between Jew and Gentile for his purposes, for the blessing of the whole world. The 10 words were never about rules, just about rules. They're about relationship and responsibility between the God who saves and the people he loves. So think about it. It's the first half of the word of the first 5 are about loving God. The second 5 are about love your neighbor as yourself. And this is exactly what Yeshua says in the Gospels when he's asked, what are the most important commandments? I wrote about it in my book, Jesus Never Said Anything New, which is available on Amazon with free shipping if you have Prime. It comes down to 2 things, Shema and Ahavah, listen and love. So Yeshua is asked a question. One of the Torah scholars came to him in Mark chapter 12 and heard them debating. And seeing that Yeshua had answered them well, he said to them, which commandment is first of all? And Yeshua quotes the Shema from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. He said, well, you know the first. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love Adonai, your God, with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. Why? Because they're the first and the last word of the 10. I am the Lord and your neighbor. In another gospel, Yeshua's words, I think, are even more clear in Matthew 22 and verse 36. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the Torah? And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The entire Torah and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Why, on these 2 commandments, do the entire Torah and prophets hang? Because they're the first and the last word in the 10 words. And the 10 words are a summary of the rest of the Torah and the prophets. And the summary of the commandments begins with the Lord and ends with your neighbor. We're supposed to listen and love, Shema and Ahav. This is the way of the Torah. This is the way of Yeshua. This is the way of the kingdom of heaven. And it's not a static list of rules, but a living, responsive way of life. Not just hearing God's word, but letting them shape your life. Not just feeling love for God, but walking it out in obedience and loyalty in how you treat one another. This was Moses' message to Israel, and it's God's message to you and me today. Moses said you were there, and he meant it, because if you are part of the family of God, Jew or Gentile, you've been brought into covenant as Jews and Gentiles, and it starts with listening. Shema is hear the voice of God calling you. Ahavah is responding in love, not just in feeling, but in faithfulness. The question for us today that we're going to end on is, what does love require of you? It's a hard question to answer, because the truth is, we probably already know the answer to the situation we're asking this question of. But the reason why it's difficult to answer is because of things that have been done to us and things that we have done to other people. It's hard to know how we should love somebody, and we don't know what we don't want to do, what we know that we should do. So for some maybe watching, maybe it means forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it. Maybe it means returning to Scripture when you've drifted far from it. Maybe it means speaking truth even when it's uncomfortable. Maybe it means reordering your life around God's rhythm again. The Shema is to hear the voice of God calling you. Ahavah is to respond in love, not just in feeling, but in faithfulness, because He loved you first and because you were there. So live like that's true. I want to encourage you to take a moment. Maybe you need to pause the video. Just take a moment and ask the Lord, ask the Holy Spirit, where do I need to listen again? What does love require of me this week? And when you hear His voice, don't just hear it, do it. Because love begins with Shema. You can start today. You can start with one act of Shema, and that'll lead you to one step of love, because everything comes down to, what does love require of me? I love you guys, and I can't wait to see you next week as we continue through the scroll of Deuteronomy.